He can't remember his PIN at the ATM. There's a line forming behind him. Everyone's getting irritated. He's embarrassed until the bank manager sees the tattoo on his arm. Welcome to People's Journal Stories. Before we begin this powerful story of respect, recognition, and the hidden heroes among us, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from today? And if you believe stories like this need to be remembered, hit that subscribe button and help us make sure they are. The First National Bank on Maple Street buzzed with Tuesday afternoon energy. Office workers rushed through lunch hour banking, students deposited checks, and retirees managed monthly finances. The ATM area hummed with impatient efficiency. Frank Morrison stood at ATM number 3 for nearly 10 minutes. At 78, his hands trembled slightly as he stared at the PIN entry screen. 4 digits, just 4 numbers he'd used for 15 years. But today his mind was blank. Behind him, the line grew. 3 people, then 6, then 10. Frank felt their presence, shuffling feet, muffled sighs, the energy of modern life interrupted by an old man struggling with basic technology. "Sir," the woman behind him said, forcing patience into her voice, "are you having trouble?" Frank turned, his weathered face flushed with embarrassment. "Just trying to remember my PIN. 1 more minute." The businesswoman checked her phone, calculating lost time. Her lunch break was ticking away. Frank tried again. 1954? The machine beeped angrily. 0627 ? Another harsh beep. Each failed attempt made the line behind him more restless. "Maybe try calling the bank," someone suggested from the back. "Or step aside and let others go first," added another voice, less kindly. Frank's shoulders sagged. The simple task of withdrawing $40 for groceries had become a public humiliation. His wife Margaret would have remembered. She'd always been better with numbers. But Margaret had been gone for 2 years now, taking with her the shared memory that had made everything easier. "I'm sorry," Frank said to the line. I'll come back later." He reached for his card, but the machine had already pulled it in, refusing to return it after too many failed attempts. Now he was not only blocking the ATM, but couldn't even retrieve his card. "Great," muttered someone behind him. Now what? David Chen had been watching from his office window on the 2nd floor. As branch manager of First National, he'd seen this scenario countless times. Elderly customers struggling with technology while younger customers grew impatient. Usually he sent a teller to help. But something about this particular situation made him come down personally. Maybe it was the man's posture, straight back despite his age, military bearing even in embarrassment. Maybe it was the way he apologized to everyone while refusing to give up completely. Or maybe it was the obvious shame on his face as he stood trapped between a machine that wouldn't cooperate and a line of people who wanted him gone. David approached quietly. "Sir, I'm David Chen, the branch manager. Let me help you with that." Frank looked up gratefully. "The machine took my card. I can't remember my PIN, and now everyone's waiting." "It happens more than you'd think," David said, pulling out his manager's card. "Let me override the machine and get your card back." As David worked on the ATM, Frank rolled up his sleeves slightly to wipe sweat from his forehead. That's when David saw it. A faded tattoo on Frank's left forearm. Most of it was hidden by his shirt sleeve, but David could make out part of a military insignia and what looked like 75th in block letters. David paused. His grandfather had been military, and he'd learned to recognize certain symbols. The 75th meant Rangers, U.S. Army Rangers. "Sir," David said quietly, so others couldn't hear. "Were you with the 75th? Frank's eyes widened slightly. He glanced down at his exposed forearm, realizing what David had seen. "Long time ago." "Rangers lead the way," David said softly. Frank straightened imperceptibly. "Hooah." The exchange lasted only seconds, but everything changed. David's manner shifted from helpful customer service to something deeper: respect, recognition, understanding. "Let's get you taken care of, Ranger," David said, using his override to retrieve Frank's card. "And let's reset your PIN to something you'll remember." David escorted Frank to a private office, leaving a teller to assist the ATM line. Frank sat across from David's desk, still embarrassed but no longer feeling like a burden. Korea, David asked as he prepared new PIN paperwork. Vietnam, 1967 to 1969. 2 tours. Frank's voice carried the weight of memories he rarely shared. Long-range reconnaissance patrol. We went places that weren't supposed to exist. David nodded respectfully. His grandfather had told him about Rangers, elite soldiers who operated behind enemy lines, often alone, always outnumbered. That must have been different world, Frank finished. Different life. As David processed the PIN reset, he learned more. Frank Morrison, Staff Sergeant, 75th Ranger Regiment, Bronze Star with Valor, Purple Heart, Combat Infantry Badge, 2 years in the jungle, leading 6-man teams on reconnaissance missions that lasted weeks. After the war, David asked, came home, used the GI Bill for engineering school, worked construction for 40 years, built half the bridges in this county. Frank smiled slightly. Margaret used to joke that I could build a bridge but couldn't program the coffee maker. She sounds like a wonderful woman, Frank's expression softened. She was. Kept track of all the numbers, PINs, passwords, anniversary dates. I was never good with that stuff. In the Rangers, we had call signs and map coordinates. Simple. David had an idea. What was your call sign? Falcon 27. What if we made your PIN 0227? Easy to remember? Frank's face lit up. That actually makes sense. David programmed the new PIN and handed Frank his card. There you go, Ranger. 0227. Frank stood, shaking David's hand firmly. Thank you. Not just for the PIN, but for... He gestured vaguely, struggling for words. For seeing who you really are? For remembering that we exist. Word spread quietly through the bank staff, not as gossip, but as something more meaningful. The old man who'd struggled at the ATM wasn't just any customer. He was someone who'd served in ways most people couldn't imagine. When Frank returned to the ATM the next week, the same teller who'd been impatient the first day approached him personally. Mr. Morrison, right? Let me help you with that. The security guard, a young veteran himself, nodded respectfully when Frank entered. Other customers, seeing the deference shown by bank staff, began to look at the elderly man differently. Frank never spoke about his service to other customers. He didn't need to. But his posture changed slightly, less apologetic, more confident. The PIN 0227 worked perfectly every time, and with it came a small piece of his identity that he'd thought was lost forever. 3 months later, David received a letter. Inside was a faded photograph of 6 young soldiers in jungle fatigues and a note. Falcon 27 and his team, 1968. I thought you might like to see who we were when we were young. Thank you for helping me remember. Frank Morrison, Staff Sergeant, RT. David framed the photo and hung it in his office. Not as decoration, but as a reminder that everyone who walks through the bank doors carries a story. Some stories just take longer to see. 6 months after the ATM incident, Frank was back for his regular monthly banking. This time, he moved through the process smoothly, confidently. 0227 never failed him. As he left the bank, a young mother with 2 children approached the same ATM. She fumbled with her card, clearly frustrated as her toddler tugged at her sleeve and her baby cried in the stroller. Frank paused, remembering his own moment of struggle. "Excuse me, miss," he said gently. "Sometimes these machines are tricky. Would you like me to help?" The woman looked up, grateful for any assistance. Frank didn't touch her card or ask for personal information. He simply stood beside her, blocking the wind that was blowing receipts around, and offered quiet encouragement. "Take your time," he said. "There's no rush." The woman completed her transaction successfully, thanking Frank for his kindness. As she walked away with her children, Frank realized something profound had happened. He'd spent 6 months receiving help and understanding. Today, he'd been able to give it. The circle was complete. A year later, David Chen implemented a new policy at First National Bank. Staff received training on recognizing and assisting elderly customers with technology. The bank installed a senior hours program offering dedicated time for older customers to receive unhurried assistance. Frank Morrison became an unofficial volunteer, arriving early on senior mornings to help other elderly customers navigate ATMs and banking technology. He never mentioned his military service, but his patient demeanor and respectful approach made him popular with customers and staff alike. The 75th Ranger tattoo remained mostly hidden under his shirt sleeve, visible only to those who took time to really see him. David Chen was one of the few who knew the story behind the faded ink, and he never forgot the lesson it taught him. Some heroes wear uniforms, others wear business suits, and some wear simple flannel shirts and carry stories that only reveal themselves when someone takes the time to look beyond the surface. Frank Morrison had spent 50 years being invisible, blending into civilian life, carrying his service quietly. It took one moment of struggle and one person willing to see beyond the surface to remind him that his story mattered. Frank Morrison never wanted special treatment. He never demanded recognition for his service. All he wanted was to withdraw $40 for groceries and remember his PIN. But sometimes, the smallest acts of recognition can restore a person's sense of dignity and worth. Have you ever met someone struggling with something that seemed simple, only to discover they carried a lifetime of extraordinary experiences? Share their story in the comments. Tell us about the hidden heroes in your community. Because here at People's Journal Stories, we believe that everyone deserves to be seen, understood, and respected for who they really are, not just who they appear to be in a moment of struggle. Thank you for watching. If this story touched you, subscribe and share it. Help us make sure these voices are never forgotten. And the next time you see someone struggling with technology or taking a little longer than expected, remember Frank Morrison. You might be standing next to someone who once carried our freedom on their shoulders.